What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We have David Benavidez, 24 wins and 0 losses, taking on Kyrone Davis, 16 wins, 2 losses, and 1 draw. This fight features the boogeyman of the 168-pound division, even though Canelo just cleaned out all 4 titles with his knockout win over Caleb Plant. Canelo Alvarez stands as the undisputed champion of this division. David Benavidez used to be the WBC champion. He's actually a 2-time WBC champ. He lost the title once based on recreational drugs. He had this title stripped, and then he lost the title again after blowing weight. He basically missed weight in his, we'll call it COVID era. It was August 2020 fight against Romer Angulo. He lost his title on the scale. So that's twice that David Benavidez has lost his WBC title without losing in the ring once. Now, David Benavidez has just been surging, and anybody who's seen him fight sees the talent right there. Like, he's one of the guys who just passes the eyeball test in terms of having skills. He's tall, he's long, he hits hard, he punches fast, he has good volume, he seems to have a pretty good chin, and he just likes to get nasty and fight. He finishes most of his opponents. Like 21 of his wins are via knockout. He only has 3 decision wins. So he pretty much hit the map by knocking out Rogelio Porky Medina. Medina is a pretty solid fighter, and David Benavidez knocked him out by the 8th round. And then he had 2 pretty difficult back-to-back fights against Ronald Gavril. Now, the first one was a split decision win for Benavidez, so they ran it back. And, that first win over Gavril was David Benavidez winning a vacant 168-pound title. So that was the first time David Benavidez won the WBC championship. And then the fight was competitive, super close, so they ran it back. And in the second fight, David Benavidez won via unanimous decision, retaining his WBC belt and moving on. So since that, he knocked out the TMT, Mayweather Promotions fighter, Jalen Love. He blew him out in the 2nd round. That one was pretty devastating. And it was a pretty high profile because it was on the undercard of a major fight. So after he knocked out Jalen Love, which was kind of a comeback fight, because although he had just beaten Ronald Gavril, he had been out of the ring for just over a year because, he had just been stripped of his title for the first time due to the recreational drugs. So when he fought Jalen Love, it wasn't, he wasn't defending any WBC belt. He didn't have the belt anymore. So he knocks out Jalen Love, and then he fights Anthony Dirrell, because Dirrell at that time was the WBC 168-pound champ. So Dirrell basically won back a belt that David Benavidez had vacated, but even that was Anthony Dirrell's 2nd time winning the WBC belt. Anthony Dirrell, believe it or not, is a 2-time champion. He's been around a while, and he's a super quality fighter. I mean, can you believe that Anthony Dirrell to this day, and this is, by the way, the brother of Andre Dirrell. Andre Dirrell was actually the more highly touted prospect when they were just coming up in the amateurs, but I would say career-wise, you could argue, if there's even still an argument to be had, that Anthony Dirrell is actually the more accomplished professional out of the 2 Dirrell brothers. So Anthony Dirrell's only 2 losses to date are against Bout Jack, which was one of the times Anthony Dirrell lost the WBC belt, and then against David Benavidez. That was the 2nd time Anthony Dirrell lost the WBC belt. And that, loss to David Benavidez was such a good outing for Benavidez. Anthony Dirrell was actually competitive in the early rounds of that fight. He received a really bad cut that, to me, kind of changed the complexion of the fight. I mean, it was a devastating cut, and Anthony Dirrell is so damn tough. He just, pretty much fights through seemingly everything. I mean, this is a cancer survivor we're talking about. Pretty tough dude. So, he battled tooth and nail with David Benavidez. Ended up just being overwhelmed again by the power, the volume, the accuracy, the speed. And Anthony Dirrell is one of those guys who could kind of change up his style. Sometimes he likes to fight inside, where he's almost shoulder to chest with the opponent, kind of picking shots off like that and shooting uppercuts and counters. Sometimes, like he did against David Benavidez, because Anthony Dirrell's a tall fighter himself. he's listed at 6'2". David Benavidez is listed at 6'1.5" at the time of the fight against Dirrell, but you look at him and he was looking like the taller fighter than Dirrell because he was fighting high. He was fighting tall. Anthony Dirrell was the one who had the wider stance, who was more doing that thing, and he looked like he was a couple inches shorter than David Benavidez, even if the official measurable had Anthony Dirrell, the taller fighter. Well, David Benavidez, you know, I've seen this guy's reach listed at 74 inches, and I've seen his reach listed at 77 inches. So if anybody could give me the accurate reach of the actual accurate reach of David Benavidez, let me know. But it's somewhere between 74 and 77 inches. I've seen him fight a few times. He's got pretty damn long arms, a lot of ring coverage. He didn't have too much difficulty closing the distance against Anthony Dirrell, who himself, like I said, he's a 6'2" fighter with a pretty long reach. It's 74.5 inches for Dirrell. Well, David Benavidez stopped Anthony Dirrell in the 9th round, reclaiming the WBC title, and then he lost it again in his very next fight before the fight even started because he didn't make weight, which, I mean, he's got a lot of weight issues, and to be honest, anytime David Benavidez fights, it's amazing that he makes 168. Like, the guy is, again, he's 6'2" at least. I know he's listed at 6'1.5" sometimes, but he's at least 6'2", and he's not a skinny dude. Like, he'll shrink himself to look skinnier by the time he gets in the ring. But, you know, I saw him, I went to the Gervonta Davis versus, it was supposed to be Abner Mares, but he ended up having a last-minute replacement because Mares got hurt. I think it was like Hugo Ruiz. Tank Davis stopped him in like the first round, but I saw David Benavidez like outside. You know, this was at that StubHub Center in Carson, and David Benavidez, shoulder to shoulder, is not a skinny guy. In fact, he used to, by his own admission, he was an overweight dude, and one of the things that brought him into health was boxing. So boxing pretty much got him in shape. And you can even look at his body type, and it looks like that of somebody who used to weigh a lot more than they currently weigh. But yeah, long story short, it's just very interesting that he's still campaigning at 168 because he could easily be 175, and he wouldn't be a small light heavyweight if he went up a division. But he lost his title for the second time, this time on the scale versus Angulo, but he knocked Angulo out like in the 10th round, stopped him. And then in his very next fight, which is his last fight, which was March 2021, he stops Ronald Ellis in the 11th round. So right here, he was supposed to fight Jose Uzcategui, who's the former 168-pound IBF champ. He's the guy who Caleb Plant beat to earn his share of the 168-pound title, the same belt that Canelo just took from him via knockout. Caleb Plant won that versus Uzcategui. Uzcategui was supposed to be fighting David Benavidez, but, you know, tested positive for all types of PEDs, basically. So David Benavidez is having a late replacement in Kyrone Davis. And Kyrone Davis had a very good amateur career. He's a 2-time national champ, and he's a very physically talented guy. But he used to be at 154. Now he's at 168. He's 5'10". Again, David Benavidez is at least 6'2". Kyrone Davis is 5'10" with a 73-inch reach. So Benavidez is going to have the height and reach advantage. And, you know, he only has a couple losses. He had one pretty early in his career that's, you know, hardly worth mentioning. And his only other loss came in 2018 versus the late Patrick Day, who many of you guys remember. He was an up-and-coming prospect, and he had a fight against Charles Conwell. He was knocked out in the 10th round in a 10-round fight, and Patrick Day died because of the injuries sustained in that fight. It was a tragic happening, and the boxing world mourned for some time for Patrick Day. Very, very young. Still 26 years old. That's how old he was when he passed away. But that is actually Kyrone Davis's only other loss, and it was via unanimous decision. So since that, he's had 4 more fights. The third of those 4 fights came against Anthony Dirrell. This was in February of this year, 2021, and Dirrell was the favorite here. And, you know, Dirrell, he had been off since the fight with David Benavidez. So this was Anthony Dirrell's first fight in like over a year after that really, really tough stoppage loss against David Benavidez. He takes on Kyrone Davis, and Kyrone Davis wins a few of the early rounds, it seems. You know, at least, you know, in my book, he was bouncing around on the outside, and his strategy was to actually punch on the bounce, which, you know, it's easier said than done. And, you know, he was getting in and out pretty well, but his strategy wasn't to just come in and ambush. A lot of people thought that he was going to just try to close the distance and fight an inside fight versus Dirrell. Dirrell, again, is actually a very skilled inside fighter. As tall as he is, Dirrell hides his chin pretty well, keeps his chin low, and is just so experienced. I mean, the guy's fought so many. I remember when he was going to war with Sakio Bika, 2 different fights against Sakio Bika. The first was a draw, and the second, Anthony Dirrell won. Well, against Kyrone Davis was pretty much boxing him from the outside, and he was like looking for his moments to come in. He's a pretty muscularly like built guy, so people just assume that because he's built with so much muscle that he actually hits, that his punch matches the look. Well, it's often not the case. You know, sometimes you'll have very lanky or rangy or just regular looking dudes who happen to pack a hell of a punch, even if they don't look the part. Well, Kyrone Davis kind of looks the part, but he doesn't pack a devastating knockout blow. Like his, you know, he has 6 knockouts out of his 16 wins. So he has a far less than 50% knockout ratio. But against Anthony Dirrell, again, there were like a few swing rounds, and there were a few that you could definitely, or you know, as definitely as you could get in these competitive type of fights, that you could bank for Anthony Dirrell. There are a couple maybe that you could have banked for Kyrone Davis, but then there were a few swing rounds where it seemed like I was leaning Anthony Dirrell as I'm watching the fight, but you know, the commentators as the broadcast was going on were saying, you know, we have Anthony Dirrell winning this fight, but there are a few swing rounds that you could legitimately give it to Kyrone Davis as well, and we really don't know what we're headed for going into the scorecard. So this continued to be a pretty competitive fight. I thought that Dirrell had more or less taken control for most of the rounds in the second half of the fight. I pretty much had Dirrell up either 7-5 or maybe even 8-4. Well, the fight was scored a split draw, meaning one judge had it for Dirrell, one had it for Kyrone Davis, and then the third had it 114, and it was a draw. So pretty anticlimactic, but it was a competitive fight. Not the greatest look for Anthony Dirrell, who, again, he's the caliber of a champion. 2-time champ fighting a draw against Kyrone Davis. Not exactly where you want to be. I mean, he obviously rebounded in this last fight, right? Anthony Dirrell just scorched Marcos Hernandez with a deadly uppercut. One punch just flat on the back. You don't even need to count all the way to 10. One of those types of knockouts, which don't come very often for Anthony Dirrell. I mean, he does have 25 knockouts out of his 34 wins, but lately it's been more via decision, which is the case with most fighters. When you start fighting nothing but elite opponents, you start winning more of the fights that you do win by decision because it's hard to knock out elite opponents. Well, Marcos Maidana got KO'd badly in the 4th round. So that was Anthony Dirrell's bounce back win after this disappointing draw versus Kyrone Davis. And that fight versus Marcos Hernandez, that knockout for Dirrell, took place on the Canelo Alvarez versus Caleb Plant undercard just last weekend. But back to Kyrone Davis versus Anthony Dirrell. It was ruled a split draw. Kyrone Davis has had one fight since, and he won a unanimous decision, although it was against Martez McGregor, a guy who was 8-4 at the time. So unanimous decision shouldn't mean a ton. It was just a couple months ago. I mean, it's good to get the win, but it's not exactly against an elite opponent. So, you know, when I'm looking at this David Benavidez versus Kyrone Davis matchup, I'm just not seeing enough evidence from Kyrone Davis, aside from him boxing pretty well against what I consider to be, even with that knockout for Dirrell aside, a kind of over the hill. I think that Anthony Dirrell has seen his best days. He's like 37 now, so he's still competitive, but I mean, I don't see him winning a belt at 168 again. I mean, I could be wrong, and I mean, I hope for his sake that he proves me wrong. but I think that Anthony Dirrell is now on the decline career-wise. So that was Kyrone Davis's best showing, the draw versus Anthony Dirrell. And I just don't see that same style of, bouncing on the outside and then trying to jump in against the 6'2 fighter who, David Benavidez isn't the type of an opponent that you have to go looking for in the ring. He's going to come find your ass, and he's going to have some heat for you, like from the opening round to the last round. And his power runs deep into the fights. Late rounds, middle rounds, early rounds, it doesn't matter. I mean, he can score early knockouts, but he tends to kind of pick up the pace as the rounds continue. He's got very good condition, and again, his volume is very high for somebody who hits so damn hard and throws with pretty fast hands. So I don't think that Kyrone Davis is going to be able to take David Benavidez's punches in the way that he was able to take Anthony Dirrell's. I mean, we might have some interesting moments in the early rounds where maybe David Benavidez gets tagged by the shorter fighter who's coming in for the ambush, throwing, crisp counter punch combinations. Like, he'll let you kind of lead with a jab sometimes, and he'll meet your jab with his jab. And when you start letting go a power punch or two, he's taking that opportunity to close the distance and let his punches go. So he might have some success. I just don't think that he's going to be able to fight a measured pace in the way that he was against Anthony Dirrell, because David Benavidez just doesn't let you off the hook like that. He doesn't let you rest. He's not somebody who will just kind of sit back and wait to kind of, look for certain shots. He's forcing the issue. He's going to pressure you into exchanges. I don't see how Kyrone Davis is going to continue to stay away from that, unless he's just going to play a totally perimeter outside game where he's basically just letting David Benavidez run up the score, winning round after round, and basically saying, I'd rather take less damage and lose via decision than to really challenge this guy and throw, a lot of exchanges with him and lose via knockout. I think that that's the decision that Kyrone Davis is going to have to make here. And Kyrone Davis is a durable guy. He hasn't been stopped yet. His 2 losses came via unanimous decision. He's durable. So, I think that David Benavidez is going to win this fight. He's just too damn good talent-wise, too fast, strong, big, all of that. Again, I don't know how much longer he's going to be able to fight at 168. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if after this fight, or if he can't get the Canelo fight at 168, then maybe he'll have to go to 175 light heavyweight. And he might want to start going there sooner rather than later, because it looks like that might be the next place Canelo campaigns now that he's clean house, or at least won all the belts at 168. I get that people still want him to fight David Benavidez at 168. I mean, people still want him to fight Jermall Charlo either at 160 or 168. I don't think that Canelo's going to be going down to 160. He might fight Triple G at 168 instead of 160. But yeah, David Benavidez, I think his days are numbered at 168. In terms of the eyeball test, he's looking like one of the most dangerous guys from 160 to 175, like anywhere around those divisions. David Benavidez is about as must-see as it gets, because, again, he's finishing just about all of his opponents, leaving nothing to the judges. And I think that he is going to beat Kyrone Davis, but I actually think that this one is going to go the distance. I think that Kyrone Davis is going to fight a measured enough fight and be able to kind of somewhat dictate the terms of the exchange, because there's going to be a certain point where David Benavidez is just going to be walking Kyrone Davis down. But Davis moves pretty well. He feints pretty well before he throws his punches. And I think he'll do enough moving to buy enough time to where he's losing the rounds, trying to find opportunities to have his moments. But I think that he might get dropped at a certain point. I just think that he's going to be able to survive the 12 rounds and lose via unanimous decision. He seems to still be improving his game, and he's starting to grow into the division a bit more. He's not that 154 guy anymore, not 160. He's starting to become a more solid 168. And again, he's a good athlete. So I think he's actually going to survive the entire 12 rounds. So I'm going to go David Benavidez via decision. But yeah, let me know what you think of Benavidez versus Kyrone Davis. If Benavidez wins this one, do you want to see him as Canelo's next opponent, or do you want to see Canelo fight somebody else before fighting David Benavidez? Let me know in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.